We've been working a lot in the state to protect the rights of people with autism. I also am here representing the newly formed New York State Allies for Public Education organization, where my wonderful friend and colleague Jeanette is part of. It's a centralized group that represents over 40 allies across the state and growing. The last count we had was about 60,000 hits to our Facebook. And that's a number, that's a force to be reckoned with. And I think about 59,000 come from Long Island, but, you know, I woke up today and I went and I got our local newspaper, the Journal News, and it says, we must not become a collected all society. And today happens to be Constitution Day. In 1787, our framers signed the Constitution. And I'll read one excerpt. The Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, protects the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, except when the government obtains a warrant based on a probable cause. Today I'm here to speak about privacy of our children's personally identifiable data. And I think we touched on that a lot towards the end of this hearing. And everybody's asking the question, why do we rush the Common Core? Why do we rush the assessments to the Common Core? It took me about 5 hours, and I wasn't quite, I was thinking, well, should I mention this? And it became very clear, we rush this because it's a data point. It's a data point that they want collected in this huge database cloud that is hosted by Amazon.com, and the name of the database is called InBloom. And I think it's really important that people understand that FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Protection Act, was expanded unilaterally by our United States Secretary, Arne Duncan, unilaterally without congressional approval, to expand to allow third-party vendors to be authorized representatives. And what that did is that opened the door to these contracts throughout the country, eight states essentially have pulled out of the InBloom contract. Two of those states are on the fence. One of those states are on the fence, that's Massachusetts, and the other two have one district or two districts straggling. New York State is the only state that is still standing alone in giving our personally identifiable data, New York State, to this InBloom database. So you have to ask yourselves, well, of course they rush the assessments. They need a data point. And, quite frankly, I wrote New York, Engage New York help desk, because I said, how do I opt out my children from their personally identifiable data being shared? And they said to me, the problem request was, Ms. Rudley would like to know how to opt out uploading of her 3 children's information into InBloom, and if all schools are required to use InBloom. It's funny, I was on the phone with State Ed and I said, how do I opt out my children? They said, you have to email Engage New York. The answer I got back is yes, every school is required to upload student data into InBloom. You should contact I'll paraphrase, you should contact your child's school district to inquire about their policies. Well, gentleman, Dr. Rogers just said that the data is controlled by the state, not by the districts. The ambiguity around who is responsible for our student data is really concerning. And I think it's important to note some of the items, the attributes that were created. And before I do that, there's a great comment from this commentary in our Journal News. It says, just because we've built the technology doesn't mean we have to populate it. Some of the attributes makes my hair curl, but I curl even more. Discipline information, it's a category. The data that will be uploaded, student violation, victim, witness, if you're a reporter. The academic and disability information, learning disability type, class tracking grouping, career path type, which FERPA has said is unconstitutional and it is not legal to upload this information. And even more disturbing, even the long outdated and stigmatizing references to mental retardation. That is an attribute in the database. Parental home information, if there's a single parent at home, a military parent, a pregnant teen mother, a displaced homemaker, parent and personal work emails. Why do we even need to collect this data? You can talk about encryption, security, you can talk about all of that. But it's a civil rights violation. It's without parental consent to have this data uploaded. And this issue hasn't been talked about it hasn't been talked about until very recently because we didn't know what was happening. So Race to the Top funds were attributed, and states were told that if they take the Race to the Top funds, they also had to be mandated to create this database. Why is New York standing alone? So it's been a long day for everybody, and as under my name, the topic was special education, and Regent Tillis spoke about his daughter and it being developmentally inappropriate. And there are many, many children who have special needs and are classified for special education who are sitting for these excessive tests, and no amount of extra modifications is going to make these tests any more appropriate developmentally in any which way or form. And I conclude with this. Last spring, the Assembly passed 2 bills unanimously, bipartisan support, to protect students' data. One of the bills is to allow you to opt out, and the other one is for parental consent. And just recently, as of Friday, I found out that the Senate, 2 people on the Education Committee, Senator Jack Martins and Senator Joseph Robach, have also introduced same-as bills. So what I come here today is to ask the Senate to, of course, please move that forward, those 2 bills on the Senate, and see to it that it's passed through the legislature and hopefully signed into law. But the real ask here is we should be removing and pulling out of this contract. It's not necessary to have this data. The outcomes for students to have better outcomes with the data is not connected to personally identifiable data. And I ask you, the Senate, to carry this forward, senators from the Education Committee, and I really appreciate being here today, and thank you.
Lisa, I know the hour's late, and I try very hard not to speak for my colleagues. I have enough challenge doing that for myself. But Senator Zeldin chairs the Consumer Protection Committee, and identity theft and issues in that area of the law he takes very seriously. I must say, following up on some of the things that Tom Rogers said, this one to me it's simple in a way, but it's vexing and frustrating at the same time because there are a lot of moving parts. And I recognize the basic need for appropriate data that ties into things that enable you to get state aid, that enable you to get federal aid. And I want to ask you a couple of quick things. I'm leaving aside perspective right now, but FERPA, as many of the things we talked about today, NCLB, all that kind of stuff, emanates from the federal government. I haven't seen this, so I'm asking you in earnest, are you aware of any pattern of violations that exist right now? Because when I do think about it, and Dr. Rogers talked about this, if you have one central repository, that's perilous, and it may be efficient as well, because I look and think there are no real safeguards or protocols for the school districts who now may be trying to do the right thing, but may not, by default, if nothing else. Are you aware of any egregious violations that we should be aware of? Because I haven't seen anything like that.
Well, this database doesn't exist with this personally identifiable data. So in terms of talking about student data today, that's personally identifiable and sensitive data, it does not exist today. However, there have been breaches. If you just Google security breaches in student data, you'll find that there are breaches in many different facets in higher education mainly. So the issue is for me is, one, why are we even collecting this sensitive data? 2 is absolutely there's been breaches in security. I mean, been publicly documented. Living Social, a discount company, there's Amazon, the Amazon cloud that it exists on, was breached, and all these consumers' information was available to the public. I think in Virginia there was a mistake in the database, and all the mailing labels had the students' social security numbers on it. It's about the sensitive data. I understand and I appreciate that we need to share the data with the busing companies. I understand we need to share the data for scheduling. But why does someone need to know what someone's career path is when they're in third grade or fourth grade or fifth grade? Why do they need to know if my child is diagnosed with autism or has mental retardation? Here's a great example, or something we can play out. My son is very close to being declassified right now. And what if down the road this identifiable data, he goes for an opportunity, he said, well, Max, you had autism, you were classified for autism, so we don't think you can get the job. And if everything else is in place because that piece of data, that's his own, he can choose to tell that company he had autism or has autism. But it's his choice. And it's my choice as a parent to protect my children's data. And without my